Now, next week, President-elect Donald Trump is going to officially start his administration. Now, this is one of the exciting chapters from American history. Now, keep in mind, now this time, unlike the previous administration, the President-elect Donald Trump is going to shake up the political system. Now, if you follow the news closely, now during the previous couple weeks, that a few nominees have been undergoing this what we call the confirmation process, and some of the candidates and faced the harsh criticism and also, of course, the tough questions during the Senate hearings. But meanwhile, at this moment, and despite all the naysayers, people are still excited about the future for the country. But when we talk about this foreign policy, very often we tend to think about what do we know about China at this moment. And we know that as President Trump is going to kick off his administration, China, it has to be one of the priorities on his agenda. Now, at this moment, again, the question we need to ask is, after starting his administration, will President Trump will continue his hawkish tone towards China? And also, what about the trade war? And also, most importantly, this global economy, is it going to continue to shape up the entire world? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker, who is Dr. Michael Patrick. And again, if you follow our show, you should be familiar with Dr. Patrick. He's an international journalist, and he's been covering international news, and especially the presidential news for decades. And in this episode, we're going to ask all the questions. Well, Michael, and welcome back to The Missing Piece, and happy 2025.
Thank you for having me on the show. Well, thank you so much, and Happy New Year to you as well.
Absolutely. Well, Michael, I want to get started. Right now, I'm holding an article and came out of Wall Street Journal. You know, when we talk about the incoming administration under President-elect Donald Trump, we have to talk about one person who is Elon Musk. Now, the article is entitled that Musk wants $2 trillion of spending cuts. And here's why it's very hard. So pretty much the article went on to say that Elon Musk, again, he's going to be part of the Trump administration, and he's going to use unusual or unconventional methods to deal with some of the official or governmental businesses. My first question to you is, why do you think Elon Musk is so much interested in being in politics today? Because we know that he's been the owner of X, and also he's been the founder of Tesla, SpaceX. But for him to be participating in this political game, is this an unusual move, or he has something bigger for his personal goals?
Well, I don't think one can measure entirely what Musk's goals are, but certainly involving outer space, certainly in the automobile industry, certainly in many aspects of AI. He is a player in all of the emerging fields and that are undergoing change. But I think as an entrepreneur, he connects with Trump and the kind of disruptive evolutionary change that we see happening in the American political landscape. And so they resonate. I think that Trump has attracted a whole team of strong characters who are controversial, but have all proven to be ready to change things significantly in Washington. And that's why some of these, it's not just all Donald Trump this time. It's Donald Trump plus all of these characters that are known for disrupting the status quo and are committed to changing and disrupting the status quo, that are now part of the team, part of the cabinet, or in Musk's case being kind of one half step out, but really fully engaged in as it were, draining the swamp in Washington. You know, there was a former president, Lyndon Johnson, said that how difficult it was going to be to go in there and drain the swamp, because suddenly you have all the alligators coming to the forefront when you do that. And he had a clever way of saying it, but the bottom line is that it's a lot easier said than done. Ronald Reagan went through this effort to change Washington significantly with the Reagan Revolution. It's easier to say it. It's going to be fascinating to watch them try and pull this off. They start with 100 executive orders on day one, and those 100 orders cover all manner of topics, including China. And so I think this is going to be a very fascinating few weeks as they kind of lay out and try and deal with what their plans are. But they're not talking about just making a few cuts here and there, but a terraforming of Washington. And how successful they are with that, we'll see. I mean, they've got some pretty tall orders on deck. Stop the war between Russia and Ukraine, dealing with the major partner on the planet with China, dealing with stopping the refugee crisis, the literal invasion of millions of people into the United States, which we see a problem in places like Europe. Some of this has been planned by others, but certainly it's swamping every system in both in the United States and in Europe. So, yeah, it's going to be a very interesting period of time. And Elon is one of those characters that fits that resonates with Donald Trump and his style of disruptive leadership.
Interestingly, Michael, that before our conversation, I actually came across a short video on one of the major Chinese media social media sites that actually was about Elon Musk. Now, as I am sitting in my house in Beijing, and one thing I do want to remind our viewers, and also, of course, this, that Elon Musk, it's one of the most popular American celebrities in China. I mean, again, not only that his company Tesla, it's very popular, but also that he has done a lot of great things, and also he's been very open and vocal about his friendship with the Chinese government and also with the Chinese people. But meanwhile, let's bring another person into our conversation, who is Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio has been nominated to be the Secretary of the State under President Donald Trump for the new administration. Now, recently, during his confirmation hearing, that he made several harsh comments about China, and also believed that China is going to or continue to be a major threat to the United States when we talk about this political complexity, economic uncertainty, and also surely this about human rights issues. So Michael, from your perspective, one hand, we're seeing someone as Marco Rubio is going to be the Secretary of the State. And also on the other perspective, we're seeing Elon Musk, that who, again, as you called, is a disruptor of the game or is a disruptor of the political system. How do you think that for someone like Elon Musk is able to handle the complexity of the political game? Meanwhile, he's already popular in China, and also his business continue to thrive in China.
Well, I think part of it is understanding this pre-election, pre-inaugural time we're in, where Trump has really backed up a little bit. We saw the fires going on in California. The political implications are tremendous, but you don't see Donald Trump making himself the front spokesperson for all of the criticism and issues going on in California. If we take that for a moment and look at other issues, Donald Trump has learned from his first term going into his second, and because this is confirmation time, where these multiple leaders have to get through the Senate and finish getting on the team, he's letting everybody else take some of the lightning instead of it all coming down on him. And so he's backed up a little bit and let these other people move to the forefront. You and I were talking, I think, separately about the role in Europe. And some of the things, I was talking with someone recently about the European situation, where Elon Musk has been over there stirring up the fires and seen as participating in German elections. So, the point is he's letting them vent. He's letting people know this is a disruptive period, and he's got tigers on the team. In other words, he's got some very strong, dynamic personalities. In terms of China, I think the most notable step is China's vice president coming to the inaugural. That's not right. That's not a normal process to have such powerful world leaders coming to the inaugural. That's a statement in my mind of a new era with China, not necessarily a hostile one, but an out front, a little more outspoken time where it's not just diplomatic speak, but there are going to be some frank conversations and friendships, I think, real friendships develop. So I'm more optimistic based on focusing on the participation of China's vice president. It's not a small matter. If you have different opinions in the cabinet, I'm sure they exist, but Trump is very good at using that sort of thing. The closest thing when I explain it to Americans, I talk about what we call good cop, bad cop. You have a suspect in the room, someone you want to influence. So you have one cop that acts like the bad guy, like he's going to tear him up, and he's very, brutal in his conversation with him. But then you have the kind cop who gets him a cup of coffee and calms the suspect down. And between the good cop and the bad cop, you actually lead to a confession, and you accomplish what your purposes were. Americans understand that because we're all about cops and robber shows. But the bottom line is you have strong personalities and you let them vent. And it sets up the deal that then Trump comes in with a little more statesman-like approach, but being his strong-arm self to try and find a way forward. And I think that's what we're going to see. You're going to see some real shakeup, genuine change to the degree that he can. And I tend to be a bit more skeptical about that list of 100 statements that he's going to sign today, executive orders and actions that he will take. When I say today, I mean on inaugural day on Monday. He's going to sign a lot of papers. That's part of what he promised, and he will. But rolling it all out, that's going to be a roller coaster ride.
But Michael, how do we understand the statements from Donald Trump back and forth? Because again, during the campaign trail, that President Trump continued his rhetoric that putting tariffs on Chinese commodities. But meanwhile, again, post-election, that Trump also came out to say that he has great relationship with the Chinese leader. So right now, I think at this moment, as a Chinese national, and again, friends around me, and also we've been talking across the fields, how do we know that which card Donald Trump is going to play when it comes to China? Because this is really, really critical. I mean, again, we are seeing two unconventional leaders. One is Chinese leader, another one is Donald Trump. So how do we know that China is going to or willing to work with the U.S., continue for this mutual benefits? I mean, again, the two words is mutual benefits, and no one would like to see one of the two largest economies collapse or continue to fight between each other. So, Michael, from your perspective, how do we know that is Trump going back and forth or a flip-flop that way, or we really need to pay attention for the next step, or perhaps even during the 100 days? What do you say to that?
Well, I teach a course called Strategic Narratives, and it has to do with the fact that every country has multiple stories it's trying to tell. And those multiple stories are aimed at different audiences and different purposes. Meanwhile, they may be running one thing they're not talking about and another thing they're talking about, but they come from different stories they're trying to tell. When Trump was running for president, he often said things that benefited his domestic audience. that helped to get him elected, people that are out of work or feel competition and don't believe the United States economy is strong, who are concerned about power and energy and all of the touchstone issues that got him elected. So he has so China may appear in one narrative under one role, and then in another narrative, China is dealt with differently. And they're not necessarily opposed, but they are congruent. They lead to the same kind of art of a deal. And so if you just listen to what he said about China during the election, you're hearing the message, the strategic narrative that was aimed for the American public. Not that it's not true, but that's one part of a larger series of multiple stories, multiple strategic narratives that every country is operating, by the way. This is not an exclusive American strategy, but breaking down those, sometimes you see them, sometimes they're visible, and many times those narratives are under the table and really never surface. That's one of the problems with the news media that we have today, is it'll often tell the stories it likes, and it doesn't tell the other stories that it needs to. I talk to my students about the collapse of Syria. If you think that a ragtag bunch of ISIS guys just kind of waltzed through the country in 3 or 4 days and overtook Damascus and sent Assad to Russia, you'd be mistakenly overvaluing those soldiers. The intelligence services and operations were running behind the scenes for years to set up the fall of Assad. It wasn't just something that happened because ISIS got in a bad mood and rolled on Damascus. They were kind of allowed to take the credit for it, but nations are constantly changing and working to develop different narratives for different purposes and for different audiences. Sometimes they're public, many times they're not. I have confidence that the relationships between the United States and China will continue to improve. But you have all the issues going on with TikTok and Red Note and some other things. There's a lot of stories going on, a lot of strategic narratives, but they're not all negative towards China. They just we may hear some of them and go, oh, that is what they believe. No, you have to put it in the context of multiple strategic narratives. Some we see and many we don't.
Well, Michael, I'm very glad you mentioned TikTok and also Red Note. I that's really lead to my next question. I mean, again, of course, that our viewers realize that currently there is a heated debate because TikTok could be banned by Sunday. So in other words, starting next Monday, Americans will no longer have any access to TikTok, and this could be a major issue. And based on the survey, that in the state of California alone, more than 37 million people actually are using TikTok for businesses or for international friendships. And there are so many reasons that the Californians are protesting for this TikTok ban. But meanwhile, let me give you a reaction from the Chinese perspective, that that Red Note and WeChat are two of the most popular social media sites in China. Now, one thing that I want to remind our viewers to say, one day that we woke up in the morning and then we realized the social media, WeChat and also Red Note, are filled with international content. So in other words, we are seeing that more Americans or even non-Chinese residents are using social WeChat and Red Note on the content. They're producing content. So, Michael, from your perspective, do you think this is a good approach that for, Americans or non-Chinese residents to get on Chinese social media sites like WeChat and Red Note to continue to be open and also build this international friendships and also share all those engaging or even fascinating content? So give us your analysis, because as a Chinese national, we were very shocked because we didn't really know what happened to those two sites. But again, it's been a week and we get used to it, but it's still kind of strange to see Americans are dancing on red notes or posting their cooking recipes and their family decorations and on WeChat, and those things are just new to us. What do you think of that?
I think it's a great entertainment on one level. Part of it is the American consumers knew their own government had cracked down against them and was using Facebook to get people out of social media because they were opposing different kinds of government policies at the time. And the government wanted more control and influence. And we've seen Zuckerberg change his policy about having a group of fact checkers who really were very political and getting them out of the mix and trying to return and capture the young people who were a big part of Facebook at one time and have basically were abandoning it in droves. He created his own problem in a way. But Americans are like saying, okay, you want to give us grief? Fine, we're going to go over and check out China. And I found that the development of both TikTok, it does have some national security concerns, and we can talk about that as we will, because it's a very invasive kind of process. But the creation of both TikTok and Red Note, I had a friend of mine in China said, "Are you on Red Note yet?" And I said, "I'm just getting on Red Note." There is a mix-up. And of course, I find it hysterical because these Americans think that China is good, it's just going to be the same kind of day online as it was in the U.S. No, China has some limits and has some restrictions, and they're kind of running into that, and finding, whoa, I got kicked off because I did something that, you can't do in China. So the kind of content. So I find it to be actually a rough and tumble kind of exchange. But overall, if you want to look at what messages are going to prove to create connections with China and move this in a positive direction, I think one of the things that's happening just on a pure social level is having these rough and tumble connections and Americans learning what they didn't know. I mean, I don't think if you said Mao's Red Book to a lot of Americans, they wouldn't have a clue what you're talking about. Well, they're discovering that, guess what? That's what was one of the founding concepts with Red Note. So I think there's an interesting exchange taking place and a lesson being learned in the process.
Well, Michael, I want to end our conversation by asking you the last question again regarding the social media debate. And we know that for so long, the founder of Meta, which is Mark Zuckerberg, that he's been trying to introduce a Facebook or any major social media sites under his company to China. And also that we know that today people are still actively using Twitter or X in China one way or another, despite some of the technical difficulties. So from your perspective, again, by adding Elon Musk to Trump administration, from this tech perspective, do you think that this is a new door open, or maybe it's a positive message for all the what we call the major tech giants? Because another thing that I want to ask you, just related to sitting U.S. President Joe Biden, during his farewell address, he sent a lot of warnings to American people, and one of the major warnings was related to what he called the tech giant complexity. So in other words, I don't think that Joe Biden, he understood, or he still can grasp the concept of having someone like Elon Musk to be part of the political system. So again, from your perspective, the last question, do you think that having Elon Musk on Trump team, this is a good strategy, or this is an open door strategy for other Western social media come into China, or perhaps even crack the door in China? Your final thoughts.
Well, first of all, I think that Biden, I appreciated the conversation about oligarchies, and he talked about very wealthy billionaires that have influence. Well, look, he has his own set of billionaires. One of the reasons Biden was upset was because he was losing control of some of these techs, giants and platforms that were no longer going to do his bidding on behalf of the Democratic Party. So it's a matter of acting as if it was all just some kind of a virtue issue. Really, he had his own game afoot, and he was sort of losing at that game. But I think that to recognize that these platforms have a huge impact. There are positive and negative impact. They have to figure out. China has influence now over Americans at a certain age that is incredible, and in terms of the numbers of people that are participating, and so this process of dealing with the fact that you have these social media platforms, they're not going away. They do present dangers and information and privacy and values that are particularly accented in the United States, such as free expression. And there's people going to jail now in Great Britain for saying stuff that would have been years ago considered free speech and untouchable. And they're spending more time in jail than your traditional criminals. So there's a revolution that's still going on involving these tech giants. And Musk is simply emblematic of one of them. But there are these other tech giants that include TikTok and Rednote and many others. Billions of dollars are in that balance this weekend over TikTok. Amazon stands to benefit hugely, depending on how this goes. Billions of dollars are at risk. I think I read a report that if they don't abide by the ban, meaning the places like Amazon and Apple don't abide by the ban, then they could put at risk like $85 billion in fines.
Wow.
Now, nobody thinks that's going to actually take place, but there is a lot of narratives, as I talked about earlier, different storylines that are being run by all the players on the field, including the tech giants. And so seeing Musk be a little more visible, I think that'll probably work to the advantage of addressing some issues that clearly are still out there. And just as a matter of just a stand back and observe, I think it's great fun that we see this issue coming forward between China and the U.S. I think it'll have overall, when we get the other side, a positive impact on trade and more and greater understanding.
Well, again, Michael, starting on Monday, the President-elect Donald Trump is going to officially start his administration. I mean, we don't know what kind of strategies or what kind of policies will be carried out within the first 100 days. And as you mentioned, as a very experienced international journalist, again, you mentioned that the news are going to pay a lot more attention to what he's going to carry out. But meanwhile, I think all eyes are focusing on this inaugural address on Monday, what kind of message that he's going to send out to the world. But meanwhile, speaking of China and U.S. relationship, there are a lot of uncertainties. But again, as you mentioned before, it is the mutual interest for both countries, from the governmental perspective and also from the citizens' perspective, to see the positive improvement. Again, as we mentioned before, at the end of the day, people around me, and including myself, that we do not want to see the deterioration of the relationship between the two countries. And ultimately, we still want to travel to California. We still want to go to Hawaii, all those countries to travel and sightseeing. And also, we welcome and embrace all the Americans and more international friends come to China, really understand what this country is about. Well, again, Michael, it's been a great conversation. We really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for your insight. And most importantly, I love to welcome you back to China. And if you ever get a chance, please bring you and your family come to China, and we loved to see you in person. And again, maybe by the time we're gonna have more fascinating stories to share. So thank you so much for doing this.